Hi and welcome back to my commentary on life. If you've visited this channel before, you'll know that I enjoy minimalism. I like having clear space, less belongings to worry about, and actively buying less stuff, although my bank account would challenge me on that. Today I'm taking a look at the history of minimalism, which transcends art, design and lifestyle, all things I love. Now, the concepts of minimalism can be traced back throughout human history. Ancient Stoics talked about this mindset, and I know it was around before then. But I'm going to take a look at the last 150 years and examine the relationship between the changing world and this movement. I think the influence on minimalism as an aesthetic and minimalism as a lifestyle are more linked than they appear. If I show you this painting and tell you that it's realist, it's a photographic depiction of something that happened, then you would assume that it's old. It's very old. You can tell by the clothes and the setting that this isn't set in modern times, and the general darkness of the scene is something we've come to associate with pre-electricity times. But this painting is actually where our story of minimalism begins. Well, it's where I'm beginning the story of minimalism. This style of art was a move away from convention by rejecting the historical and mythological subjects that had dominated art for centuries. In the early 20th century, there was a global movement in society that sought a new alignment with the experience and values of modern industrial life, modernism. Artists around the world started to use new imagery, materials and techniques to create art that they felt better reflected the realities and hopes of modern societies. We're going to do a step-by-step to get from this to this. So it's the mid-19th century and we're moving away from intricate biblical compositions in art towards representing real life. Some artists found that they could capture the momentary and transient effect of sunlight by working outdoors in the open air, painting quickly to capture their subject as it is, rather than painting from a studio. This resulted in greater awareness of light and colour and the shifting pattern of the natural scene. Brushwork became rapid and broken into separate dabs in order to render the fleeting quality of light. The first group of painters to do this exhibited their work in Paris in 1874, and were ridiculed. This painting, Impression Sunrise, was particularly slated, and the name of the painting was used to label the group of painters, hence Impressionists, but as an insult. Which is so strange because nowadays the Impressionists are considered groundbreakers and held in such high regard. It would kind of be like the film community 150 years from now looking back and considering TikTok videos a form of high art. Anyway, Impressionism developed and we ended up with Post-Impressionism, which brought in the concept of conveying emotions through your artwork by using very deliberate colours and playing with form. It still focused on the everyday, but focused less on the realism of the image and more on conjuring a feeling. I love this one. This is by Henri Matisse and the style is called Fauvism. Fauve is said to have meant sexy beast. No, it doesn't. Wild beast. Ew, I was thinking about the film. Fauve is said to have meant wild beast. Everybody is taking the piss out of these good painters. The Fauve artists were the first to break with traditional methods of perception. Their spontaneous, often subjective response to nature was expressed in bold brushstrokes and high-keyed, vibrant colours used directly from the paint tube. What I really love about this is the scope for personal interpretation. Matisse wasn't saying that this is what the guy actually looked like. He wasn't cutting around France looking like that. But he gives us clues about the character in the contrasting colours and complex layers of tone. Okay, I'm sure you're all going to recognise this next one. Picasso! He looked at everyday life and thought, what if it was cubey? I took these photos in the Picasso Museum at Barcelona, because that's how I spend my free time. Cubism aimed to show different viewpoints at the same time and within the same space, creating three-dimensional form. Hence the name. This was coined by a critic who looked at the work and said they have reduced everything to geometric outlines, to cubes. Cubism opened up almost infinite new possibilities for the treatment of visual reality in art and was the starting point for many later abstract styles, including Constructivism. This also might feel familiar. Art is beginning to look very abstract now. Constructivism rejected the idea of art as separate from other aspects of life and was in favour of art as a practice for social purposes. This style can be seen in political campaigning and was heavily used to signify a new future. There are so many other amazing movements, artists, and artworks that I could include in this history of minimalism, but I don't want this video to go on forever. Maybe one day I'll indulge. But we've arrived at our destination. Developed in the USA in the 1960s and typified by artworks composed of single geometric shapes, minimalism extended the idea that art should have its own reality and not be an imitation of some other thing. The medium or material from which it is made and the form of the work is the reality. Minimalist painter Frank Stella famously said about his paintings, "What you see is what you see." For the longest time when someone said minimalism, this is what I would think of. But I consider this to be completely different to what we associate with minimalism nowadays. 60s minimalism to me is cold, hard, plastic, metal, constructed, and making a statement. Not the type of thing that I would probably bring into my home. What is interesting to me is that minimalism and indeed modern art is a rejection of historical and conservative values. Modernism was also driven by various social and political agendas, which were often utopian and associated with ideal visions of human life and a belief in progress. I love art so much. Just know that if I ever do merch, it's going to be hand-painted minimalist artwork. Between 1920 and 1930, when a lot of the modernist art movements were forming, the word minimalism was mostly associated with the Bauhaus school's ideal of balancing beauty with utility in product design. Teachers and students of the school offered an alternative to uninspiring manufactured products and reimagined the role art could play in society. By injecting creativity and thoughtfulness into the production of otherwise cheap and ubiquitous items, the Bauhaus School inspired the concept of elevated design for everyday life. When I was at school, we studied Bauhaus for my higher art exam, and I got an A. But one of the things from Bauhaus that has always stuck out in my mind is their teapot designs. They look awesome. Some of the designers clearly are tea drinkers. Some of the designers probably not. Because surely an all-metal teapot, including the handle, is not good design. In 1943, a 17-year-old Swedish hustler, which is the best way I can describe him, started IKEA. This boy apparently started out business as a child selling matches to his neighbours, and when he founded IKEA, it was a mail order business. That's quite an origin story. Although I really hope it doesn't get made into a film. Hollywood, I'm looking at you, it's not that interesting. IKEA quickly became known for its simple and easy to assemble furniture, so there's definitely some credit to be given in a sense of minimalism aesthetic. Prior to this, if you needed like a table, you would go somewhere that manufactured and sold tables and buy one. It may or may not have matched the other furniture in your house, and you would probably own it until either the table broke or you died. It was probably well made enough that it would last for some time and would likely be passed on to your children. But IKEA, along with other companies and industries, advocated that your home was also a fashion statement that needed to be updated with the times. This wasn't something that the working classes worried about before. It was more of a, if a new convenient appliance became available, then that's when you would buy it, not I have to change my furniture and appliances to suit what's in vogue. Now suddenly redecorating every few years became a thing. My issue with this, and anyone who has one eye on the environmental crisis's issue with this, is what happens to your furniture when you're done with it. It's also well known that IKEA furniture is not built to last. So you may not have been thinking about updating your look, but you might be forced to because the shelf on the Billy bookcase has fallen through, or the material on your sofa has worn thin. It's not minimalist to have to constantly buy new furniture. What we were seeing here was the embrace of aesthetic, but not necessarily lifestyle. Now, living in small spaces with few belongings is not a new idea that was invented by someone. It's actually always been a hard reality of living in poverty. The difference is context. People who can't afford to live in better conditions aren't making a choice to do that. And whilst minimalists believe that less is more, you can only really make that choice when your basic needs are met. Back in the 60s, the hippie counterculture lived in groups, travelling in vans, sharing their possessions amongst each other. and not wasting resources on showering. For most of them, it wasn't because of their upbringing. It's said that hippie culture started out on college campuses, so it's fair to assume that the people who were taking part in this did come from a background with steady income. But hippies felt alienated from middle-class society, which they saw as dominated by materialism and repression, and they developed their own distinctive lifestyle. The aesthetic wasn't minimalist. In fact, it was pretty much appropriated from Eastern culture. But the values of environmentalism, simplicity, and community are all in line with minimalist living. Between the 80s and the turn of the century, the concept of simple living began gaining traction. This is a time where more and more celebrities were beginning to show their activism towards campaigns that they believed in. The slow food movement came around after the opening of a McDonald's was protested in Rome. This inspired similar subcultures in other areas like sustainable fashion and travel. The idea of simple living became a modern idea that rejected the fast acquisition and accumulation of more and more things. But if you didn't know any minimalists or slow livers or anti-capitalists, how would you know about this lifestyle? I can remember watching movies and TV shows when I was a kid, and they would always portray minimalists as weird and pretentious and idiotic. There was a show back in the early noughties called The Wild House, and there was an episode where one of the teenage daughters starts going out with a hippie kind of boy, and he convinces the girl to give away all of her possessions because someone out there needs it more than her. That was the whole reason. Like, there was absolutely no thought process behind getting rid of her belongings other than someone else needs it more. And I struggled to grasp that because it didn't make sense. How can someone else need your bed more than you? Everyone needs a bed. Anyway, she gets rid of a lot of her belongings. Her family are very concerned about this. At no point do they step in and go, actually, we bought that bed for you and you're not giving it away because we're your parents and we know that you need to sleep on a bed. So the episode plays out that she gives away a lot of her belongings, regrets it, and dumps the boyfriend. And I've never known what we were supposed to learn from that. I don't know about nowadays, but back then, kids' TV shows really were like, this is the bubble of life that is normal and everybody is allowed to do, and everything outside of that is weird and we shouldn't take part in it. Enter the internet. From the 2000s onwards, I think that there has been two ways in which we've moved forward in understanding and embracing minimalism. The first is aesthetics. With the rise of Instagram, Pinterest, and any social media where you're curating life, you were searching for something pretty, something clean, and something refined to post. Even cluttered spaces would be filtered to create a look. But a popular and easy way to create a pleasing look was minimalism. You are the feature that occupies a clean, empty space that is not competing for attention. Second is movement. Yeah, it is movement. I thought that wasn't right, but it was right. It's movement. Back in 2009, the Minimalists started a blog. This was two guys who'd gone through some transitional moments in life and felt like they weren't in control. They'd bought into the consumerist lifestyle, and although they were earning great salaries, they were feeling unsatisfied by the constant chase for more. So they started practicing minimalism and shared their journey via their blog. This led to several books and 2 Netflix documentaries about this journey. In a nutshell, blogs walked so that vlogs could run. I don't know if I said that right. Blogs walked so that vlogs could run. We have the father of minimalist living, Matt D'Avella, who collaborated with the minimalists to create 2 Netflix docs and combines the lifestyle with filmmaking to deliver very satisfying minimalist YouTube videos. Plus, you have people like Ronald Banks, Ashlyn Eaton, Nate O'Brien, to name a few. Going back to one of those simple living concepts, community really is a big part of the minimalist way of life. And I would argue that online communities and how that fits in with our life now in society are crucially important. I like meeting other people who like the same stuff as me, and we can talk about it and we can share ideas. And it's so lovely when I see people comment on these videos, like talking about how this fits in with their life and what they think about it. And I think the community side of it is really part of the mindset. Owning less becomes a good feeling. It links in with productivity and fulfillment in your life. and then begins to inform your life decisions. And of course, in 2020, I started my own channel, Ash on Film, which combines minimalism, philosophy, and general commentary in order to explore how to live a simpler life. Yes, I'm inserting myself into history. I'm not deconstructing the pretentious stereotype, am I? I think the reason that we're seeing a spike in minimalism again is due to culture. Environmentalism is very in, partly because the climate crisis is unignorable, but also because ethical choices are currently marketable. I also like to think that we've come to a point where we recognise our disappointment in things. Have you ever ordered anything from an app that was unusually cheap and took 3 months to arrive, and when it did arrive, didn't match up to your expectation, but it would cost you more to return it than it cost you to buy it in the first place, so now this thing is your responsibility, but you don't want it? It's so common now. I think we've definitely got to a place where we must be able to recognise that something is just there to take your money and not to actually benefit your life. And in a very large sense, things bring you short-term joy, not long-term lasting joy. There are so many topics that could be covered in the history of minimalism. I very nearly included fashion, but it was going to add a whole other 10 minutes to this video, so I thought I'll do that some other time. But thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like it and subscribe if you'd like to see more. And if you know someone who would enjoy this video, share it with them. Create a quiz for after they've watched it and grade them on it so that they feel like they have to watch the video over and over again, especially the art parts, because you're going to grill them on it and they don't want to fail the test. Or however you want to share it is fine. See you next time.